Your Creative Push, episode 339.
There has to be the possibility of failure, or else it's not going to be interesting. It's not going to be fun.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is David Cheifetz. David is an internationally acclaimed and collected artist who continues to push the limits of contemporary realist oil painting. And David comes on the show today to talk about his creative journey, which actually began with a foray in architecture, and eventually it led him down to Baltimore, Maryland at the Schuler School of Fine Art, where he began to pursue his painting. He was actually surprised at the direction that school took him. David talks about how he found a balance between art, work, school, and family, and one of his strategies actually of utilizing his downtime to imagine painting. A really interesting look into that strategy. David also talks about his method for approaching a still life, how he started pricing his work, and the inspiration that he gets from David Goggins and Eckhart Tolle. And finally, David talks about the importance of experimentation, focus, and utilizing small blocks of time, not just for his art, but for his mental well-being. I had such a great time talking with David. This episode happened like 6 months ago, and it was such a pleasure to listen back to it, and it really re-inspired me as we are starting to get back into the podcast. The hiatus is almost over, but I know this episode will bring you a ton of inspiration today, so please sit back, relax, and be inspired by my guest, David Cheifetz. David, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. I've been looking forward to this interview for a really long time. Yoshino actually hooked us up. I am in love with your work. You bring a life to still life and to everything else that you paint in just such a beautiful way. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's an honor. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, man. I always like to give my guests an opportunity at the top of the episode to sort of give us a brief bio, sort of how you got to the point you are today, creatively speaking.
Sure. Yeah. So feel free to jump in at any moment. So growing up, I have a lot of architects and engineers in my family. So growing up, especially my grandpa, he's an awesome landscape architect. And I think that must have inspired me quite a bit because for as long as I can remember, I really wanted to be an architect. So I was always drawing and creating as a kid, and then preparing to go to college, like all through like junior high and high school. I was basically just like, I'm going to be an architect. And so I studied architecture at the University of Washington in Seattle. Started working after that, and I spent I guess about 2.5, 3 years working in various sized architecture firms in Seattle, and I switched several times to different size firms because I found it very creatively unfulfilling. I mean, I loved architecture and in theory so much about it. And the school for architecture was awesome. But in practice, there wasn't a lot of creative ownership. And an architect, in many ways, I think, has to be like, what's that phrase? Like jack of all trades, but master of none.
Right.
Something like that.
Right.
So there are so many, extraneous things besides what I wanted to do, which was just design and conceptual design, especially. And even though I got to do pretty cool stuff like 3D modeling and rendering, which is pretty cool, but still at that point, it was still very unsatisfying. So I knew that I needed to enter a career that was more creatively autonomous and immediate. Like I wanted to see the results in front of me quickly. Whereas like architecture, like the timelines are so ridiculously long. Like I worked on a lot of mixed use high rises in Seattle, and like so like if it went through, like maybe in 5 years you'd see your project or something. But at
It's
the
a
time,
long
actually, it was
time.
yeah, it kind of sucked at the time because like I was working on a bunch of different like kind of cool skyscraper type buildings, and at in 2008 the crash happened, and then they all stopped. They all got put on hold. But at that point, I was like already starting to transition away. So like we went to Washington D.C. so my wife could go to graduate school, and so I considered a few different fields, but what I really wanted, I decided, was to do graphic novels and comic books. And what I felt that I was lacking was my skills in figure drawing. So I looked on the Art Renewal Center website. I don't know how I found them, but I'm so happy that I found them because they have a list of like Art Renewal Center approved ateliers and schools that have good, solid classical training. And I found the Schuler School, which is a small little family-run school in Baltimore. And I realized that we would live in DC and my wife would be going to graduate school there, that I could take the MARC train up to Baltimore and go to the Schuler School while still telecommuting, doing architecture full time with the firm in Seattle. So like that was like a perfect situation. It was like exhausting and a lot of work, but it worked out really well. The Schuler School is really awesome because they have such a comprehensive approach. Like in some atelier programs that are really good around the country, you'll like start and you'll just be doing like charcoal cast drawing for a long time for like, I don't know, like 2 years or something before you're allowed to touch paint or go into color or whatever. But at the Schuler School, their philosophy is that you should just jump in, do everything all at once. That was great because they had the figure stuff that I was going there for, and the life drawing and cast drawing, but they also had us doing sculpture and watercolor and oil painting and still life oil painting. I kind of figured that the still life oil painting was just going to be a cool extra thing that I would get to learn while getting better with figure so I could do comic books. But pretty quickly, like within a couple months, I was like, wow, this is like the oil painting is so much fun. I could never have imagined that it would be so much fun. Just like the
Mhm.
handling of the paint. Like I had never used it before at all. I didn't know how to hold a brush or what to do with color. Like I had a lot of drawing training in architecture, but we almost never talked about color. So it was so much fun, and but so for like still for like about a year into Schuler, I was like doing everything I could to like try to get into comics. I was preparing submissions, and I sent a I sent a couple like to Marvel in DC, got rejected. So they're like, keep on going, keep trying. But I was pretty determined. But about a year and a half into Schuler, I was like, wait, I love this so much, the oil painting, both still life and portrait stuff, that I decided to just go with that. And in a way, it almost seemed a more accessible path to a career, or at least at the time for me, because we had these twice yearly shows at the Schuler School where students could sell their work. And I was doing okay with those. And so I was like, wow, this is actual money. And one of my teachers hooked me up with local galleries, and I started selling. And so I just decided, well, I'm just going to do this. This is awesome. I love it. It has everything I want. It has immediate creative gratification, total ownership. No one is my boss. And, with most illustrators, you answer to people, you have a lot of constraints and a lot of direction. So this was like even better. So yeah, I was just all into painting. And so about 2 years in, so like 2009, I was able to completely stop. Like up until that point, I had been somehow doing 40 hours telecommuting with architecture and going to the Schuler school Monday through Friday. So it was a lot of weekend and nights late working. But in 2009, I was bringing in some money from painting, so I just switched completely over and went full time with painting. And then we moved around. We spent some time in California. My wife started working, and then we started having kids. So my daughter is 5 years old. My son is 3 years old. And so for 4 years, my wife was stay-at-home mom, and I was just working, painting, teaching, all that. And then just about almost 2 years ago, my wife wanted to resume her career, so we kind of it was like her turn, so we kind of swapped roles. I became
tag team.
Yeah, exactly. I became the primary caretaker, and yeah, it's been about 2 years that she's been full-time back at work, and now so that has of course reduced my working time, which is that's my current biggest challenge, is like navigating that, like on many levels, trying to maintain my career and creative practice while trying to be the best caretaker that I can be. So it's like at first it was kind of like identity crisis, but I'm trying I'm starting to find a groove. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Cool. And let's get back to that because that's, I think, a pretty important. Actually, you know what? Let's get into that right now
Sure.
before we go back to touch on some of the other things about your story that I wanted to ask you about. So can you talk about that then? Like not just becoming a father, but switching the roles and becoming like a full-time stay-at-home dad. And like you said, how that kind of not eats away at your time, because it's awesome time that you get to spend with your family.
Yeah.
But it takes away from time that you can be like completely focused in on your art. So could you talk a little bit about that change of seasons, like what it was like to have that transition where you have a lot less time? How did you kind of find the time? And then when you did find the time, how did you make it be like focused work? Because I've heard you talk about before, like the whole 10,000 hour thing, how it that doesn't necessarily mean just because you put 10,000 hours into something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to become a master. You have to put focused, really good hours into that to become a master. So I know that's kind of a lot of questions, but how did you kind of find that balance?
Yeah.
Or have you found it?
Oh, well, yeah, it is definitely a work in progress. I mean, at first it was just actually, you know what? At the very beginning, I was like, wow. Like there was a certain amount of relief, like because I had just been going so hard for 4 years. Like artists don't make a lot of money usually, and so supporting a whole family was very gratifying, but at the same time financially, stressful at times. And I had just finished a large solo show. It was like a culmination of a ton of work. So for a couple months, I was like, oh, this is actually, this is pretty cool. But then quickly, as predicted by myself and my wife, I began to go a little insane, and it was a rough couple of months. I was like, what? Like, am I even like? Do you even paint, bro? Like, what am I? What am I doing with my life?
Sure.
Yeah. So that was a very difficult transition, but things gradually got better. Like with the kids getting a little bit older and more self-sufficient, we moved and bought our first house for the first time, so like we could stop moving finally. We worked out a kind of a thing where on Saturday and Sunday, at least, my wife would take over with the kids, and I could just work all weekend, which is awesome. gradually we incorporated some more childcare. And so, now for parts of the week, they have a couple hours of preschool here and there. And then we have like some babysitting going on here and there. And so I feel like right now I'm at about like 1/3 capacity for art, which is it it never feels like enough. But honestly, when I was full time, and I think a lot of artists at whatever capacity you're at can relate to this. Like, no matter how much time I had or have, I never feel like it's enough.
Definitely.
Yeah, and like even when I was full time, like over full time, I was like 50, 60 hours sometimes. I never felt like it was enough, and yeah, I think part of it is like that. For artists of all different fields, like time is the artist's friend. Like you need a lot. I think a lot of people that aren't artists underestimate the amount of time. Like you need some like almost downtime that's still work time, where you like can plan or recharge or yeah, the creative process is so it doesn't translate hour for hour. It's very
Right.
yeah, it's very ephemeral and so yeah, it's never enough time. And actually that kind of helped me when I realized, okay, no matter how much time I have, it's never enough time. I'm never going to feel like it's enough time, so just chill out a little bit. So that's a work in progress. Like having kids has a huge impact. And yes, I've listened to other artists describe how through parenting they've actually been able to kind of improve their time management and with the time that they do have, really make the most of it. Enter the zone quickly and not waste any time. For myself, I feel like that hasn't fully happened yet. I guess I feel like I didn't have a big issue with wasting time beforehand. So now that I have less time, it just literally feels like less time, and I haven't seen any like significant benefit.
Right,
So
right.
I can't lie. It's not helping yet, but I do think that well, I trust, and I can see how as my kids are growing older, like that they become more self-sufficient, and there are things that I will gain creatively at some point. It's just that at this point it's still just trying to figure that out, and yeah, figuring out how to be okay with having less time for my career. And I like working.
Right.
So at first, really, I kind of was like, oh, whatever. Like, I'm not gonna be feeling insecure that I'm no longer the primary breadwinner, or that I'm making less
Right.
money, and I'm gonna rise above that. but yeah, it's a thing. It's definitely a thing. Like it's like, man, it's an adjustment to be okay with. Yeah, I mean, it sounds so shallow, but feeling like I'm contributing less financially to the family.
Hmm.
It kind of sucks sometimes, but I mean, at the same time, of course, like I'm contributing, well, way more in other areas. But it's just something I need to like figure out, I think.
Well, might have to hook up with you in a couple months, because that's what me and my wife are going through at the moment too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like that's why our whole move up to Philly and everything. She got a great job up there, and now I can kind of the pressure's off of me a little bit, and I
Yeah.
can maybe get a job that's a little bit more fulfilling to me. But again, that means fulfilling jobs never pay well. It's the casino job in the slums that's what pays well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so maybe I'll have to hook up with you soon to see
Yeah,
to get some
absolutely.
tips on how to deal with that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we can like trade
War stories.
sympathize. Yeah.
Cool. Well, you mentioned in that about like the downtime, and realizing the importance of the downtime, but also the planning and recharging and all that. And I've heard you talk about, I forget how you worded it, but like imagining painting.
Hmm.
Does that ring a bell?
Oh, yes.
Could you talk about that? Because I think that's like fascinating and really important for people to hear.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So it began when when we were in DC, and I was uh, learning how to paint, and there was a lot of commuting involved, like just hours spent like uh, dozing on the MARC train and the subway. But I what I realized was like if like I was kind of obsessed, and like I would think about the paintings I was working on, or something that I wanted to try, or something um, a technique that I needed to remember. And so I would just think about it and imagine it. And it was almost as valuable as painting itself. Like by the time I was actually putting brush to panel again, it was like I was off like to the races, because I had already planned so much in my head and gone over it, like thought about it so much that yeah, it's really really helpful. And so that's a really helpful trick for like people who you got time that you can't actually be doing the thing that you want to be doing, but you can let your mind kind of do it. So maybe while you're commuting, like driving somewhere or walking somewhere or whatever, I guess it's visualizing doing that thing can be solid, quality, focused time that's going to improve your creativity, uh, improve your skills. It's weird to think that, like, yeah, I was better at painting after just thinking about painting for a while.
And how much, like, when we talk about visualization, like, how much, or like, are you closing your eyes and like putting your hand out and like imagining that you're actually painting it, or are you just kind of just thinking about it and trying to conceptualize what's gonna be on the future canvas?
Yeah, more the latter, like thinking about like maybe wow, if I can see how if I change the values, like, yeah, tomorrow when I get back to school, I'm gonna alter the values in this section of the painting, and I really want to pump the color up on my focus. And yeah, like I would just go over that kind of stuff, and trying to remember the things that my teachers had told me about value or color or how to handle the brush. So um, I guess more like, yeah, yeah, a little both, I guess. Yeah. Like overall conceptually, but also like technically.
And does it ever do damage to you, like to your psyche? I know for me, like when I think of ideas for writing, if I don't get them down, I become somewhat overwhelmed, especially as more and more ideas come to me and they start to actually form either a story or a concept. I like need to get it down, or else either I lose it, or else I just get too overwhelmed. So, like, as you're thinking of certain things that you want to do to either improve a painting or to start a new one, does it ever kind of drive you crazy until you're able to get to the painting itself?
You know what? I think that is actually, maybe it's something unique with writing, because can I tell a story that will really expose my geekery?
Yes, please.
Okay. This is really, we're gonna go deep here.
Yes.
So so
Your creative push exclusive.
yeah. So my experience that's similar to what you're talking about. So I've played like pencil paper tabletop role playing games since
Hmm.
like I was a kid, and I still play with a group from college to this day. Like every other Thursday, we keep doing that. So
Nice.
anyway, when we were in California for a while, we were doing it online, and I decided to be a game master for. I was running a Star Trek: The Next Generation themed role playing game, and so I was basically, it's basically, you as a game master, you kind of write out the scenario, you imagine all the certain things that could happen, and what happened to me was exactly what you're talking about. I would think of things, and they would just like snowball, and I would just obsess, and I couldn't stop thinking, and it was very distracting, and I like had to remove myself from like something I was doing to like go write it down, and it would like drive me insane, and I would have to like just get it down, or else I'd feel like I'd lose like this genius idea.
Mhm.
So that never. I, needless to say, I haven't GM'd since then, because it was just so distracting and I got too obsessed. But I haven't had the same experience with painting. I can like think about it, and it will stick. Like the ideas will stick in my head, or I can jot some notes down. But it's never like a rush. I never have to like scramble for a piece of paper. It doesn't drive me crazy. So I think that might be something unique with writing for some reason.
Now, do you think that's because you, like, as you're coming up with new ideas or changes, is it like finding a solution or like coming up with a solution to a problem that maybe you either have or didn't realize that you have? And then once, maybe I'm going too deep here, but, and then maybe like once you kind of solve that problem, there's like no other answer, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think maybe that's it. Like you, right? I like imagine the solution, and basically, I'm not going to know until I try that solution. Like there's no like I need the physical feedback before I try it, to know if I need to find another answer. Whereas with writing, especially like fiction or something, you can just keep going. You
Right.
can just keep going in your brain. So,
Right.
yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, yeah, like I'll think of the solution, and well, okay, I'm gonna try that next time. But there's nothing else I can do about it right now.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Interesting. Yeah, I think that's like something that I'm not a visual artist, so, but yeah, like people don't think that there's any value in actually just like sitting there and taking the time to imagine your future work when you don't have the time to get to your work, and just how valuable that can be and how effective it can be, and like how, like you said, like actual solid progress can be made just by sitting there and visualizing it. So cool.
Yes. Yeah. Totally.
So I was hoping we could go back in your story. There's a couple points that I wanted to talk about, but first of all, I think it's that's totally the way to do it. The way your atelier did it, to let you like literally try your hands in a ton of different things, and just because you've set your sights on graphic novels and comic books and working on figure drawing, that you can try all these different things and not be afraid to go in that direction if you're seeing immediate results. It's so
Yeah.
unlike, going down the path of being an architect and then, actually getting a job as an architect and realizing, okay, like I've started down this path, and if I want to like reinvent myself, I have to actually go back to school and just start kind of almost from square one. So it's
Yeah.
like that's such a valuable thing for schools and ateliers and even parents to do, is just like throw everything, like let your students or let your kids do whatever they want and see what jives with them and what they find results with and happiness with and joy with, and let them just go down that path. It does, just because you said you want to be an architect, it doesn't mean you're defined by that story that you've told yourself. And just because you want to do comics and graphic novels, that doesn't mean that you can't audible like once you find something that you do love. Anyway, that's kind of a tangent, but
Oh yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I think like why close the door on anything? Like it's not going to hurt. So
right,
yeah, just take it all in, and go to
right.
the Schuler School if you want.
Go to the Schuler
If you
School,
want to,
sure.
yeah, if you want to do fine art, they're really amazing, and it's way more affordable than your typical art school. So there you go.
Excellent. We'll link it up in the show notes page for people.
Awesome.
But I wanted to talk about that initial period then, when you actually kind of surprised yourself maybe by making sales, realizing that this is a thing that can you can immediately start on this journey. What was that period like? I know you still had your job where you were telecommuting.
Yeah.
What was it like to start making sales, to realize this artistic life, and then to taper off and then finally quit the job?
Oh man, it was amazing. Like I was like I was very unhappy. I went through through some unhappy times, like near the or yeah, all through doing architecture, just very frustrated, And so as soon as, right when I started learning at the Schuler School, I was already feeling awesome, like pretty good, because I was taking those first steps towards fixing the issue. So I felt, in control. But yeah, as soon as painting started to sell, yeah, it's amazing. It was amazing that people will pay money for nice pictures and very like extra is like icing on the cake, like because the making itself was what I loved. That was the reward in itself. But to like have other people want to spend decent money on it and perhaps appreciate it, oh, definitely appreciate it more than I did. Like I love the act of painting, but I am often not like super like I might be excited about a painting at first, but give me a couple months and I'll be like, I'm like, whatever. But it's so cool that other people like, wow, they can gain so much joy and satisfaction from looking at your work that it's pretty cool. So yeah, that's part of that's the reason why I chose to shift, because that was so gratifying, and the money was like it was gradually increasing. Like I started start very modest prices. One of my teachers was just like, yeah, just imagine like what's the least amount of money you would take to hand this over and feel good about it. And so that's where I started, and then just like gradually increasing prices each show. There was, I forget when exactly it was, but there was a moment when I calculated it out and I had reached basically minimum wage. And I was like,
Yay!
Yes, I was like, yes, this is amazing. Like it is possible. Like I can do this. Like I can do this for a living. Cause like, at that time we had kept our expenses as low as possible. Like before we went out to DC, I'd like sold my car, gotten rid of a bunch of crap, and we just rented kind of a shithole in DC. That was
It was probably still pretty expensive, right?
oh yeah, I mean yeah,
DC is crazy.
yeah, it was next to the metro line in Columbia Heights, which now I think is kind of fancy. At the time, it was like in transition,
Mm-hmm.
and but yeah, it was not that cheap, but it was like still had like cockroaches and bed bugs and fun stuff like that. So we were definitely staying on a modest budget, and when I reached reached minimum wage, I was like, I'm all in. Like this is awesome. Like I will never go back. Like I will do whatever it takes, like I will live the lifestyle that it takes to keep this career going. Yeah, luckily that worked out well.
Right, and that's why finding that or realizing where the joy comes from and that the joy comes from the actual process is so important, because then it's like, oh, look at all this stuff that I can really live a minimalist life. I don't need to own all this crap, and I can really lower my expenses, because all I really need, besides of course your wife, is this thing that brings me joy, and any way that I can find to have my life cater to that, it just makes it so much easier to live kind of in not great conditions for a short period of time.
Yeah, totally.
And that's such great pricing advice. I haven't heard that yet, but that's just like the best way to think about, what's the minimum amount of money that somebody could give you for you to essentially lose this piece of art from your life. And
yeah,
if it's too high, make more stuff, make more stuff that either, increases the quantity so that each piece isn't as valuable or as important to you, but also you just have more stuff to give away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think, at least for, maybe at least for painters, like it's better to, like err on the side of, selling too quickly. Like if you just stacking up old paintings, in your studio, I feel like that's like creative baggage, I think. Like at least for me, like I want to get that stuff out of there as quickly as possible, because then it's like, oh, well, gotta fill it up again, gotta make new stuff. It's motivating, and you don't feel like beholden to these old works. So I would err on the side of pricing too cheap, and well, the market will tell you, like if it sells, then you can raise the prices. So yeah, I agree. Don't be precious. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've also heard you or read, I don't remember which, talking about some of your at least recent inspirations,
Hmm.
and namely Eckhart Tolle and David Goggins.
Oh
And
yeah.
I've read The Power of Now, and I haven't read Goggins' book, but I've heard him talk enough to kind of know what he's all about. And to
Yeah.
me, that those two titles or those two people seem, for some reason, like at odds, even though they're both super inspirational to me, and I totally jive with what they're talking about. Eckhart Tolle is talking about just being in the present moment, and kind of it's like this calming type of you know
Yeah.
atmosphere, whereas Goggins is like, go work hard. You're not working hard enough. like like work your Nikes into the ground, like, you know what I mean? So could you maybe, I don't know if you want to compare them or not, but like maybe could you
Sure.
talk about how those two, at least those two individuals, have kind of influenced your mindset as it relates to kind of life, and also the day-to-day life of being an artist?
Sure. I think both approaches really speak to me. Like I kind of would put like another book that many artists like is the War of Art by
Sure.
Stephen Pressfield. Yeah. So I kind of feel like that is in the same kind of category as the Goggins book, because it's like, yeah, get your ass off the couch, stop, don't procrastinate, just go for it, just do it. Like more of a aggressive, like, no mercy type of inspiration. And that I really enjoy. It kind of like lights a fire for me. Whereas, yeah, the Power of Now helped me in more ways, I guess I would say.
Yeah, like life ways.
Yeah, definitely. Just like mental peace and the ability to deal with like young male rage, um, and yeah, just uh, like not get overcome by, as most many of us are, like with past like anxieties about past and future. That was just like a
Hmm.
huge relief to me, almost like it made so much sense. And later I was able to apply it to art and to teaching, very much so to teaching. Just thinking about exactly what I was doing. That's it. And there's something. I mean, that is exactly what being in the zone is. So like it's a muscle, and when for the Power of Now is like keeping that in mind. Like it makes I feel like it gave me the ability to take a shortcut to getting in the zone, because as soon as I just started to, I guess, it's basically meditation. You let thoughts come in and go out. You don't judge them. They just come and go. But all you're trying to do is concentrate on what exactly you're doing right then. And so for people who meditate, that might be just breathing. But when you're painting, that can just be like, okay, my brush is doing this. I'm doing this brush stroke. I'm mixing this pile of paint, and let all that mental chatter just kind of wash over you and not fight it. Like you're not going to be like, I'm not good at this because I keep on thinking of all this crap I got to do. You just let it come and let it go, and you don't like judge it or comment on it in your mind. You just keep on just going with what you're doing. And that is meditation, is just like the practice of doing that. It's not like always perfectly having a blank mind. It's just like being able to just keep on trying to do that. So yeah, that really helped me creatively, and with teaching, it really helps me because I'm pretty introverted, and so teaching, all the extroversion, like, burns me out so quickly.
Mm.
But having that kind of meditation practice, it took me through so many difficult, or every time I teach, it takes me through those like times when like I'm feeling like socially exhausted. Like it's just like, nope, don't look at the clock. It doesn't matter. Just like, this is what I'm doing right now. I'm gonna help this one person right now, and then I'm gonna help the next person, and I'm just like keep on going and going, and it turns it into something fun, and satisfying, instead of something that is like a slog. So that really helped, and it also helped with nerves. At this point, when I demo, I'm basically not nervous at all, and which is crazy, because the first time I did a demo, I was literally, I don't know if I don't think anyone noticed or anything, but I like, my heart was like pounding out of my chest, like my brush was shaking, like it was just like ridiculous. I was so nervous. But whenever that happened, I would just start, okay, I'm not gonna think about, all I'm doing is thinking about what my brush is doing. Like my brush goes down to the palette, my brush comes up, my brush does a brush stroke, and I just keep on doing that, and the nerves would just like dissolve.
Mm.
So at this point, the teaching doesn't get me nervous at all. And whereas it used to be like that, public speaking was like my Achilles, like that's my biggest fear. So,
You're not alone in that respect.
yeah. Is that how you feel?
Definitely. 100%.
Yeah.
It's become easy to speak on a microphone to people, but man, even like I was saying, I'm moving up to Philly, and I'm a poker dealer for a living. I deal poker
Okay.
all day, every day. I've been doing it for like 7 years
Oh,
now.
wow.
It's no problem. But I had an audition at a different casino, and I was so nervous, man. I was
Oh, man.
shaking.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, this is like a simple game that I deal every single day, yet there's people watching me now, and like, it's all about me. And it's like, it's so easy, I think, for people who are introverted or who are afraid of public speaking, and that's a ton of people.
Yeah.
Even doing something that you're comfortable, but you're being watched is like
Yes.
is terrifying, because it's like you're on display, and you're being judged, even though that's not the case, even though other people are just worried about themselves, or they're genuinely interested in learning from
Yeah.
you. And I think that is the way to do it, is to just take a deep breath and just be in the moment and realize that, okay, I'm just doing this one action. I'm just dealing this one card, and then I'm going to deal another card. I'm just doing this one
Yes.
brush stroke. It requires practice, and like every single day. And I think that's why it's called a practice, but
Yeah,
it's something
exactly.
that's definitely worth pursuing.
Absolutely. And what you just said is also really true. You said like, the other people are also just worried about themselves, and that that is so true. And that's
Mm.
something that also helped me. Like I would always be, I would be nervous to do a workshop, but then when I realized that, taking a workshop can be very stressful, and lots of people are like nervous because they spent a lot of money on the workshop. They want to get a lot out of it, but also they know there's other students they don't know, that they're going to be judged, or like, why are you here? Or you're not very good at painting, or whatever. Like, people are very nervous to attend a workshop, and they also might be very introverted or whatever. So when I realized that, I was like, okay, well, what if I just concentrate on, like, act as if my job is to make people be more at ease? Just concentrating on that would kill my nerves also, because it's just like, yeah, everyone is mostly concerned about themselves. Yeah,
Right. You're there to help them, not to prove your own worth to them. I
exactly.
think, yeah,
Yeah,
taking that mindset of just trying to give, I think is definitely key.
yeah, definitely.
So I wonder how that relates to, like, when you're taking it down to something as simple as, okay, this brush stroke, then this brush stroke. It's just one thing at a time. The end result of your the piece that you're working on, because I've heard you talk about how it's really important to you to not know the end result. Otherwise, it's kind of just like you're just clocking into work, kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like to sort of be surprised. So I was wondering, like, what is your mindset like then, before you start a piece and like as you're working on a piece, especially as it relates to still life, because you give such life, like I said, to still life, and you give it such like kind of a mystery. So what is like your thought process as you're approaching a piece?
Sure. Yeah. So for still life, what my goal is just that is to, take something fairly ordinary and to make it exciting, and to exaggerate some aspect of it to make it either dramatic or mysterious or powerful in some way. So it almost always starts for me as more of a visual, technical visual exercise rather than like narrative. Um, Often the narrative piece will come in and I'll add that in later and it's really cool. But at first it's usually just a visual thing. So I'll be looking at still life objects that I have, and I'll put them under my light source and I'll find one that has something that I'm excited about that can be exaggerated. So it might be like if it's like a piece of fruit, it might be the bright color, or if it's like a metal vase or silver base or something, it might be the high contrast like reflections in the metal. But I'll just pick one thing and I'm like, okay, this is going to be the focus for the entire painting. I'm going to exaggerate it as much as possible, and then everything else is in the painting is designed around that to serve that focus. While it's a simple approach, it can be difficult to stick with. You have to just keep on reaffirming that decision, to sacrifice other things for the focus. And so I put in other objects that support that don't take away focus, but maybe add some interest, but that just increase the level of focus on that one aspect of that one object. So after I've set up my still life setup, I do need to spend some time looking at it, thinking about it, kind of planning it in my mind. The more complete my mental images of the finished painting, the better it always turns out. If I just dive in, being like, oh, I'll just wing it and figure it out, about 50% chance it's gonna fail. So yeah, it's better if I just, it might just be 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Just sit down and look at it and think about what is the finished painting going to look like. So I kind of like have a goal. And invariably it will change. I mean, sometimes it's like literally works out perfect, but sometimes it just changes. But I think that's part of it. And yeah, like even with that mental image, I don't want to know that it's going to work because I need to be still learning and trying things. So there has to be the possibility of failure, or else it's not going to be interesting. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to hold my attention. I would say, like as a piece of advice, like for people, like with whatever your art is, with every new creation, find a way to experiment. Like try something new, even if it's a little tiny thing, but maybe something that you've never tried before. That will not only ensure that you keep growing and don't stagnate, but that uncertainty of outcome will help keep it exciting and hold your attention, and that will make your art sustainable. So yeah, experiment a lot.
Right. And you said finding something to bring out or to accentuate and accentuating it as much as possible. How long did it take you to really dial it up, so to speak? Like once you started experimenting with certain aspects of your paintings, like looking back at some of the early ones where you were like, oh, mixing it up and doing something crazy. Do you know what I mean? Like looking back at them now, do they seem like, oh, like I could have pushed that further, or I could have accentuated that thing much further?
Yeah, it was it was a gradual ramp up. Like when I was learning still life in school, my teachers would always be like, okay, what's your focus going to be? try to find, one area that's going to be the most important. And, that gradually started to sink in. The more I could do that, the better the painting would be. And then when I would see paintings by awesome artists like David Leffel, who's like the best, in my opinion, well, my favorite still life painter. His paintings are so powerful because of his extreme focus. I was like, wow, how can still life be that dramatic and awesome? And it's because of the focus. Like in real life, normal life, we see objects just like on a table or whatever, and everything is just this, equal. It's just stuff because there's no sense of focus. It's just stuff strewn about. There's no like dramatic spotlight. So I felt drawn to the painting. Like the paintings that I ended up liking the most were paintings that had the most focus. And once I realized that, I just tried to like do that as much as possible, just to exaggerate it as much as possible. And, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. There's like a balance there. Yeah. I feel like focus is kind of, maybe this is overly simplistic, but I feel like amount of focus makes a good painting, in my opinion.
Right. Because I feel like there's a lot of people that, there might be a lot of visual artists who are listening now that want to get things exactly perfect, and they want the still life, if they're doing a still life, to look exactly as it is.
Right.
And the idea of taking one aspect or one piece of focus and tweaking it and changing it and accentuating it would not be perceived by the audience as like a purposeful act. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like where it's like, oh, that's clearly they messed that up, as opposed to like intentionally accentuating it to bring it forward. So would you have any advice for people who want to start experimenting but don't want to like ruin their beautiful work, ruin what they've created, or ruin their kind of realistic depiction of what they see?
Right. So what I would do is just kind of like set a guideline for yourself that so you've chosen the thing, the most important thing in the painting, the focus, and then what you're going to do is as you're painting the painting, just make sure that that one thing is always at a higher level than everything else in every aspect, like in level of finish and detail, but also an amount of color and value contrast and sharp edges, stuff like that. So everything is always most exaggerated and most finished towards the focus or the center or whatever. And if you keep that, of course, you're going to work on the other objects surrounding it, but you can't let those objects overtake the realism of your focus. And so if you just keep that relationship, there will probably be a certain point in the painting when the focus is basically, as realistic as you can get it, and it's basically done. And the rest, everything else will be at some slightly more abstracted level. And you can evaluate that. Like if it looks good, maybe you are finished. There's a balance because, of course, the things can't be so rough that they start to distract from what you want the people to look at. They can't look wrong. The proportions can't be bad, but the level of finish can be abstracted. It is like accurate but loose. So I know it's a very easy thing to say and often very difficult thing to do. But I would suggest that for people, just like say, always keep the focus at a higher level of detail, no matter what, and then see what happens. And you'll probably find a spot where you can stop and like everything looks good, but the focus is really popping because it's the one thing that's the most real.
Right. That makes sense. Well, thank you. I mean, hopefully that will help somebody
Yeah.
that's listening. Like I said, that's not advice from me, but really anybody doing any creative thing can take advice from that. To whatever you're doing, find a way to shake it up, find a way to bring out something to change your norm, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And just experiment, like you said, experiment, and just find new ways to attack
Yes.
your creations.
Yes, totally.
David, before we let you go, I was wondering, we already talked about some of your resistances, like fear of public speaking, which I'm right there with you, and also not having time, which I'm right there with you. Do you have any other things that maybe presented themselves as resistances early on, or maybe still do?
Like the thing that relating to time that I still continue to trying to struggling with and trying to figure out is the time issue, and that I need to remind myself that the perfect is the enemy of the good. So like if on a certain day I'll be like, oh man, I just want 8 hours straight of just working, just painting, but I have 1 or 2, that I need to remember that getting that in is like getting 2 or 1 hours in for my art is, it's infinitely more than 0. So it hit me. It was like, I think it was one of the days last week, and it was one of the days where I don't have much time. Like certain days of the week are not good for painting, but I had like 1.5 hours while my kids were at preschool, and there were so many things on my list of things to do. Like I had, stuff with the house that needs to get taken care of, like stuff with maybe like just like the bathroom needs to get clean, the taxes need to be done, all this stuff needs to be done, household stuff, emails I'm way behind on, and all. I was just like, screw everything, just everything. I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to paint hard for 1.5 hours, and I don't care about the rest. I'll just deal with it afterwards, and we'll see what happens. And I did that, and I was so happy. Like it was a short amount of time, but that one little block of time just like made my day. And I was like, that other stuff really can wait. It's really not that important. And realistically, my family is better served with me not being insane. If you only have like 30 minutes, if that will help you get it out, and then you can be more present with the other people in your life, or more content, then I guess in a way that act of, like, I guess you could call it selfishness, is actually not selfish at all. Everyone benefits from it. So yeah, trying to take those short amounts of time and just make the most of it, that is way better than just wishing you had bigger blocks of time.
Right, especially when you don't have too much time. It's easy to kind of fall into that trap of, all right, well, I don't have enough time to do a complete painting, or I don't have enough time to, wash the car or whatever. Like, can just make you not do anything. And it's so important, like you said. And that's why, like, for me, like, becoming a morning person, or trying to become a morning person, and get the creative stuff done first. Like you said, it changes your whole day, because you feel like you've already won the day. So I completely agree with you. And I think it's not a selfish thing to get to your creativity. Obviously, this podcast is called Your Creative Push, but I think for a lot of people listening, like, if art or creativity is an important part of your life, then make it important, make it a priority, and all that other stuff can get done. What the need to get done things are, and they will get done. Parkinson's law. Just take time for yourself and for your art. It's so important.
Exactly. Yeah.
David, this has been awesome, and I'm looking at the time now, and I realize how long I've kept you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no problem. It's been fun.
But can I ask you for the final push?
Sure.
that's where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today and just give them your best final words of advice and push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say I'm just going to keep it pretty simple and say just try to stay true to yourself. Like create what you in your gut feel that you need to create. You need to create the type of work that you would still be creating, in a vacuum, regardless of audience or market or whatever. Don't worry at all about finding an audience. If your art is good, there will be, like, the audience will find it, and it's just like a matter of time. If it doesn't find an audience, that's probably because the work just isn't good enough yet. So I would just keep on going and keep improving and getting better, and remember that the point of doing it is just doing it is the point of it. So just keep going.
Just keep going. David, man, thank you so much for coming on the show today, for sharing your story and sharing your inspiration, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a privilege.
Absolutely, man. And for everybody listening, you can find David on his website, davidcheifetz.com. That's CHEIFETZ.com. On Instagram, he is David Cheifetz. And we will have everything linked up at today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/David Cheifetz. David, thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you, Youngman.
Huge thank you once again to David for coming on the show. Two major things from this episode, although there were many that I wanted to get to, and they're both kind of the same. Number one, utilize those small blocks of time. It is something that I have found that makes me a happier person, just like David talking about his mental well-being. When he's able to utilize those small chunks of time, when he has an hour, when the kids are away, or what have you, to just get to a painting and do some focused work on your art. For me, it's the same thing. If I can just knock out a little bit of work, and it's not even the knocking out of work, getting something done piece by piece, but it's the act of meditation, the act of being with your creation, of being the person who you're supposed to be for a small amount of time, and not thinking about all the other stuff that you have to do. As long as you're able to know that you have a certain amount of time, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever you have, you know that that time is yours and you'll get to all the other stuff after. Just be with your art. But the second major takeaway is when you have other downtime where you're not able to get to your art, but you're able to be with yourself, be with your brain, be with your thoughts. And the idea of imagining painting or imagining whatever it is that you do, take the time to ponder it, take the time to think about it, and have that almost rehearsal with your art. That's not only going to make it easier for you when you get to the canvas or keyboard or whatever, but it's also going to help you to come up with new ideas, to work out your problems, and most importantly, help you to get to that mentally relaxed and focused and happy state, that state that all creative people really thrive at, where you're being a producer and not a consumer. So when you don't have the time to actually produce, at least begin those incubation periods where you're thinking about it. Perception is reality, and even if you are tricking your brain into thinking that you're producing work, your brain will reward you with those happy emotions of being a producer. So again, huge thank you to David for coming on the show. My apologies to him for taking so long to get this episode out, but I am happy that it is finally out in the world to inspire you. And before we let you go as well, I'd like to say thank you for 1 million downloads in the Your Creative Push hiatus here. The numbers have actually grown, so a lot of people have been listening to the episodes that have been coming out sparingly. But hold on for just a little while longer. It looks like January is when we are coming back full time to inspire you weekly. But thank you again for continuing to listen and continuing to create. That is the whole purpose of this podcast. So as long as you keep creating, then I am a very happy man. But until next time, I love you all so much. Go and continue to create some amazing work, and we will see you on the next episode or in the Facebook group. Bye, everyone. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.